Hi, I'm Stu Hart. I'm a professor in residence here at Michigan in Ross and School of Environment and Sustainability. My work for the last 30 years or so has been focused on kind of the implications of poverty and environment for business strategy. And today I'd like to spend some time with you talking about this notion of sustainability. What does it really mean? How can we operationalize it in business terms? And then how do we actually stand up some strategies, think about it from a strategy perspective in order to tap into what I believe is the biggest opportunity looking out over the next decade or two. So the terms sustainability and now ESG, I think are big ideas, right? Really big ideas, which means they can mean different things, right? That they cover a lot of ground. And I don't know about you, but I've had the experience over the years where I get into a conversation with someone about sustainability or now ESG. Seems like it's going pretty well, for the first 10, 15, 20 seconds. And then I realize they're talking about something entirely different than what I'm talking about. So gaining some precision over what these terms mean, I think is really important. And that's sort of a first step that I want to do with you, right? Just to kind of think about this, almost, what are the categories to think about? For some people, when they hear sustainability or ESG, they think it's really just about regulation, right? Kind of cost, added cost. I want to set that one aside for now because I'm a strategy professor. So I want to think about how these ideas about sustainability and ESG actually offer business opportunity, not thinking about it reactively, but proactively. From that perspective, there are a couple of different ways I think and it's important to differentiate between those strategies that look to address social and environmental problems through a business lens that are more incremental, and those that are more fundamental, those that are more transformational. So the first kind of set of strategies I would call greening strategies. And these have been around for a while, right? I think these are the ones that are pretty well, in some cases, played out. But they would be strategies like waste reduction, eco-efficiency, right? That we can run our operations with less waste, less energy use. That saves money, right? It's cost and risk reductive, all great stuff, right? So you can think of plenty of companies that have plowed that field already. It's pretty well prepared. But you can also think more broadly, not just about sort of internal facility stuff, but rather products and product systems. There, I think, is where the rubber meets the road right now, where most companies really are most seriously kind of focused on this. And that has to do with the design of the products themselves, right? What materials are used? How are they sourced? Think about sustainable sourcing. And what happens to products during their use period? What happens to them at the end of their useful life? So I would think about this as more of a product stewardship strategy, right? One that's really sort of looking to continuously improve, reduce the negative impact of current products and processes. And so that brings us to the second category of strategies that I've been talking about. Beyond greening, we'll call them, right? Kind of quite different from the greening approach that I just described. Beyond greening is much more in the realm of transformation, right? So this is not so much about continuing and improving today's businesses, products, and systems, but rather about creating tomorrow's opportunities. So you can think of it in two ways. One is, what are the skills, capabilities, and competencies that companies are going to need for the future? Is it going to be necessary to literally learn new technologies, to maybe retire some existing technologies that are used? For example, in the dry cleaning space, right? This is an industry that everyone knows. Existing dry cleaners use a toxic chemical called perchloroethylene, right? So when you take your clothes to the dry cleaner and you get them back, you're wearing a bunch of toxics on your back, And so for those existing players in the dry cleaning industry, a sustainability strategy would be a greening one probably, right? They'd look to reduce the use of perchloroethylene. Whereas an innovator, someone in the beyond greening space, and there are several of these startups now, are looking to leapfrog over and make obsolete that whole way of doing things. So for example, you can take CO2 and put it under pressure, it turns to a liquid, and there are a whole suite of soaps and surfactants that work really well in that setting. You can clean the clothes, then just take the pressure off the CO2, it turns back to a liquid, reuse the soaps, and you've got clean clothes without having to use energy to dry them. So this is a leapfrog, kind of new technology that's inherently clean or inherently regenerative. And from a beyond greening point of view, from my point of view, that's where the action is for the future, right? We're kind of probably past the point where it's just about incremental reduction in negative impact. Rather, it's about thinking about how do we become more good. That's from a technology and competency point of view. Think about it on the market side of things too, right? There are companies that are great at R&D and about developing technologies, but when it comes to actually putting them into commercial use, it becomes more challenging. So from a Beyond Greening point of view, it's critically important about what are the markets of the future, right? It may not just be about innovating around current markets and current customers, but rather creating tomorrow's markets. And a lot of tomorrow's markets won't be, in places that we're familiar with. They'll be in underserved spaces. Maybe they're in the developing world, maybe they're rural villages, maybe they're rising kind of urban slums and shanty towns, or megacities, or in the US or Western Europe, maybe it's those communities that have been left behind and deindustrialized. How do we begin to think about those markets from an equity point of view, serving and lifting the underserved? So some of the best examples of that, looking out over the last 20 years or so have been, say, the Grameen family of enterprises, where some of you have probably heard of Grameen Bank and Mohammed Yunus. He's an innovator in the finance space where he developed a completely new business model for providing credit to rural women, by and large, right? Which then was translated into a new venture called Grameen Phone, which brought rural, handheld phone service to rural villages. That's now become the largest corporation in Bangladesh, right? A highly successful company. And the technologies that were used in order to make that feasible have bubbled up, right? They sort of trickled up. So it's an innovation driver. You have to figure out how do you serve people without much income. That means you have to do it in a really frugal way. And there's possibilities then of that moving up market, right? Sort of bubbling back up over time. And that's certainly been the case, when it comes to Grameen Phone. So as you think about this idea of beyond greening, it has to do with these more transformational strategies that create future markets and tap into leapfrog technologies that are inherently clean and regenerative. So for those companies that are serious about beyond greening, right, that are serious about transforming, sometimes it's challenging, right, because the existing kind of pressures on Wall Street for public companies make it more difficult to think long term, right? So sometimes it's challenging when you're under pressure to generate quarterly earnings and so forth. Most companies these days now have innovated kind of societal purposes. So they'll state, the purpose of our company is fill in the blank, right? In the old days, the corporate missions were primarily competitive and market dominance oriented and that sort of thing. These days, I think a societally oriented purpose has become almost expected. The problem is that many of those statements about corporate purpose just sort of hang there in the air, right? That if you look under the hood, you'll discover that there's no real connection point between the statement of purpose and the kind of the machinery of the company, the long-term plan, the resource allocation process, the crafting of strategy, and so forth. Instead, what you'll see are sustainability goals, right? That companies will have stated sustainability goals. Those goals are often developed by a separate group of sustainability people, with a chief sustainability officer. They might have mostly to do with more internal and functional things, like as I said before, energy use, water use, greenhouse gas emissions, maybe diversity, equity, and inclusion, things like that, right? But those things, while important, don't really tie directly to business strategy. So you have purpose stated broadly, and then a set of foundational sustainability goals, and then never the twain shall meet. So as we look ahead, my view is, and I've done some work on this with companies, we need connective tissue, right? A way to kind of double click on purpose that brings it to life. And what that consists of is a process whereby you create sustainability-oriented business aspirations, right? Sort of building on the foundational goals, you involve the people on the business side, kind of regional vice presidents, people that run businesses, product leaders, in the process of actually creating sustainability-oriented business aspirations. So it's not a business aspiration unless there's some sort of revenue target attached to it, right? So most sustainability goals are purely about the societal impact. But if we're going to really become transformational in terms of beyond greening, this has to become the business mission as well. So the development of business aspirations is crucial. And even beyond that, for companies, the idea of a quest, right? So out there in the world, perhaps what you're trying to do, there's some institutional resistance that it's going to be tough just for the company itself, even with its suppliers or its customers, to make the sort of changes we're talking about. in which case it's necessary to build a larger collaboration ecosystem to try to actually shift kind of systems and institutions out in the world that might make it easier and might accelerate the rate at which the kind of innovation we're talking about can happen. Think of things like regenerative agriculture, for example, right? It's like changing the entire way that crops are grown. That takes time, and it's not something that one company can do, right? That requires much more of a collaborative approach where you're building an ecosystem of partners on the ground to try to shift an entire system. As we look forward, increasingly, that's what it's going to take to really kind of tap into the opportunities associated with sustainability. So just to wrap up, from my perspective, the challenges associated with sustainability and ESG, if we're looking out there, environmental challenges, think climate crisis, think biodiversity loss and the sixth extinction, think peak inequality in the world today and the problems associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are all kind of societal challenges that increasingly business is going to be challenged to take on. And from my perspective, these are huge business opportunities, probably the biggest business opportunities looking out over the next decade or two. But in order to do that, we have to think differently about strategy. So looking back over the last 30 years, that was predominated by a greening way of thinking, kind of more incremental improvement of current products and processes. Looking out over the next 30 years, it's really much more about fundamental innovation and sustainable innovation. So if you're interested in learning more, contact Michigan Ross Executive Education for the program Sustainable Leadership in the ESG Era. Thanks so much.